Daniel Harper was officially declared dead on the night of October 14, 2012. According to police records, the incident occurred at the Harper residence on Cedar Ridge Drive, a quiet suburban neighborhood in Ohio. The area was known for low crime, mostly middle-class families, and very little police activity. At approximately 11:47 p.m., emergency services received multiple calls reporting a house fire. Neighbors said they heard a loud popping sound, followed by smoke pouring from the back of the Harper home. Within minutes, flames were visible through the windows. Firefighters arrived to find the house heavily involved in fire. The structure was already compromised, and entry was difficult due to intense heat and partial roof collapse. Outside the house stood Daniel's wife, Emily Harper, age 38. She was barefoot, wearing a nightgown, and visibly shaken. She told first responders that she had escaped through the front door after waking up to smoke, but her husband was still inside the house. Fire crews immediately attempted a search for Daniel Harper. However, the fire spread rapidly, fueled by household materials and what investigators later described as an unusually fast burn rate. After several hours, the fire was brought under control. No body was found. Investigators searched the remains of the house over the next 2 days. They recovered melted appliances, collapsed beams, and ash-covered debris. Despite the thorough search, there were no identifiable human remains, no bones, no dental fragments, no tissue samples. The official explanation given by the fire marshal was that the fire reached temperatures high enough to destroy organic material. Though rare, it was considered possible. Daniel Harper was presumed dead. Emily Harper confirmed that Daniel had been asleep in the bedroom when the fire started. She said she tried to reach him but was forced out by smoke and flames. There were no eyewitnesses who saw Daniel leave the house that night. With no evidence suggesting foul play, the fire was ruled accidental. The cause was listed as undetermined, with faulty electrical wiring cited as a possible factor. A death certificate was issued. Within a week, the town held a memorial service. Daniel's photograph was displayed at the front of the church. Friends, co-workers, and neighbors attended. Emily sat in the front row, dressed in black, rarely lifting her head. Daniel Harper was remembered as a quiet, dependable man. He worked as a systems engineer for a regional technology company and had been employed there for nearly 10 years. His coworkers described him as punctual and reserved. He had no known enemies and no criminal history. Emily Harper was described as friendly and sociable. She had worked part-time as a freelance interior decorator and was well-liked in the neighborhood. The couple had been married for 12 years. They had no children. In the weeks following the fire, Emily cooperated fully with authorities. She answered questions, provided documents, and never challenged the official conclusion that the fire was accidental. However, as investigators later discovered, there were details that received little attention at the time. One of those details was Daniel Harper's life insurance policy. Less than a year before the fire, Daniel had increased his coverage from $500,000 to just under $2 million. Emily was listed as the sole beneficiary. When questioned by the insurance company, Emily explained that Daniel had wanted to ensure she would be financially secure if anything happened to him. The explanation was accepted. Another detail was Emily's behavior after the funeral. Within 3 months, she sold the property where the house once stood. She declined offers from neighbors to help her rebuild. Instead, she told them she wanted to move on. 6 months after Daniel's death, the insurance payout was approved. Emily received the full amount. Shortly afterward, she closed her local bank accounts, resigned from community groups, and left the state. No missing person reports were ever filed for Daniel Harper. No investigation was reopened. As far as the legal system was concerned, the case was closed. Daniel Harper was dead. For the next 7 years, that fact went unchallenged, until a routine traffic stop in another state produced a result that stunned federal authorities and forced them to reopen a case everyone thought had ended in ashes. After Daniel Harper was officially declared dead, attention gradually shifted away from the fire and toward the practical matters that followed his death. As with most sudden losses, there were documents to file, accounts to close, and legal procedures to complete. Emily Harper handled all of it herself. Within 2 weeks of the fire, she contacted Daniel's employer to report his death. The company verified the death certificate and processed his employment termination. His final paycheck and benefits were released to Emily without issue. Next came the insurance claim. Daniel's life insurance policy was issued through a national insurance provider. The policy listed Emily as the sole beneficiary and had been updated 11 months before the fire. According to company records, the increase in coverage had been requested directly by Daniel, signed electronically and approved after a routine review. Emily submitted the required documents, the death certificate, fire marshal report, and proof of identity. Because Daniel's body had not been recovered, the insurance company conducted an internal review which delayed the payout. During that review, Emily was interviewed twice by insurance investigators. She was asked to recount the night of the fire in detail. Her story did not change. She stated that Daniel had gone to bed earlier than usual. She said she was awake in the living room when she smelled smoke. When she went to the hallway, she saw flames near the back of the house. She claimed she called out for Daniel but could not reach the bedroom because the heat became unbearable. She exited the house and called 911. Investigators noted that Emily showed no signs of deception during questioning. Her answers were consistent and her demeanor matched what they described as appropriate grief behavior. The insurance company also reviewed Daniel's financial records. There were no recent disputes, no large debts, and no indication of financial distress. The couple's accounts appeared stable. After 6 months, the insurance company approved the claim. Emily received the full amount. Shortly afterward, Emily closed her local bank accounts, resigned from community groups, and left the state. No missing person reports were ever filed for Daniel Harper. No investigation was reopened. As far as the legal system was concerned, the case was closed. Daniel Harper was dead. For the next 7 years, that fact went unchallenged, until a routine traffic stop in another state produced a result that stunned federal authorities and forced them to reopen a case everyone thought had ended in ashes. After Daniel Harper was officially declared dead, attention gradually shifted away from the fire and toward the practical matters that followed his death. As with most sudden losses, there were documents to file, accounts to close, and legal procedures to complete. Emily Harper handled all of it herself. Within 2 weeks of the fire, she contacted Daniel's employer to report his death. The company verified the death certificate and processed his employment termination. His final paycheck and benefits were released to Emily without issue. Next came the insurance claim. Daniel's life insurance policy was issued through a national insurance provider. The policy listed Emily as the sole beneficiary and had been updated 11 months before the fire. According to company records, the increase in coverage had been requested directly by Daniel, signed electronically, and approved after a routine review. Emily submitted the required documents, the death certificate, fire marshal report, and proof of identity. Because Daniel's body had not been recovered, the insurance company conducted an internal review which delayed the payout. During that review, Emily was interviewed twice by insurance investigators. She was asked to recount the night of the fire in detail. Her story did not change. She stated that Daniel had gone to bed earlier than usual. She said she was awake in the living room when she smelled smoke. When she went to the hallway, she saw flames near the back of the house. She claimed she called out for Daniel but could not reach the bedroom because the heat became unbearable. She exited the house and called 911. Investigators noted that Emily showed no signs of deception during questioning. Her answers were consistent and her demeanor matched what they described as appropriate grief behavior. The insurance company also reviewed Daniel's financial records. There were no recent disputes, no large debts, and no indication of financial distress. The couple's accounts appeared stable. After 6 months, the insurance company approved the claim. Emily received the full amount. Shortly after receiving the money, Emily sold the Cedar Ridge Drive property. The land was purchased by a developer as the original structure had been completely destroyed. The sale was completed in cash. Neighbors later told investigators that Emily had already made up her mind to leave long before the insurance payout arrived. She declined offers of temporary housing and avoided social gatherings. Some neighbors described her as distant. Others said she seemed focused and determined. By the end of that year, Emily had relocated to Arizona. She purchased a single-story home outside Phoenix for $430,000, paid in full. She registered a small interior design business under her own name and began accepting clients within months. To people in her new community, Emily presented herself as a widow who had survived a devastating loss and chosen to start over. She did not mention the fire unless asked. She did not display photographs of her husband. She did not speak about rebuilding her past life. There were no red flags, at least none that drew attention. While Emily was establishing a new life, Daniel Harper was doing the opposite. According to later testimony, Daniel had left the house several hours before the fire. He had packed a small bag with clothing, cash, and personal documents. He drove to a prearranged location and waited. When news of the fire reached him the following morning, Daniel understood that legally he no longer existed. Daniel did not contact police. He did not contact his family. He did not contact his employer. Instead, he disappeared. For the next several years, Daniel lived under assumed names. He worked short-term jobs that paid in cash, construction sites, warehouse shifts, seasonal labor. He avoided medical facilities, government offices, and anything that required official identification. Daniel later told investigators that the arrangement had been discussed with Emily months before the fire. Their marriage, according to him, had deteriorated. He claimed Emily felt trapped and wanted financial independence. He said the idea of staging his death was initially presented as hypothetical. He admitted that he agreed to it. Daniel stated that he believed he would receive a portion of the insurance money and then live separately under a new identity. He said he did not expect Emily to cut off communication after the payout. But that is exactly what happened. Once Emily received the insurance money, she stopped responding to his messages. Phone numbers were disconnected, email accounts went inactive. Daniel was left without support and without legal identity. At that point, Daniel faced a choice: turn himself in and expose the fraud, or continue living as a non-existent person. He chose the second option. As the years passed, maintaining that choice became increasingly difficult. Daniel could not build credit. He could not rent apartments without assistance. He could not seek medical treatment without fear of exposure. Despite those limitations, he managed to survive. Emily, meanwhile, appeared to thrive. Her business grew steadily. She joined local organizations. She made friends. To those around her, she was simply a woman who had lost her husband and rebuilt her life through determination and resilience. No one questioned how quickly she recovered financially. No one questioned why she never visited her late husband's grave, because there was no grave. 7 years passed without incident. Then, in the summer of 2019, Daniel Harper made a mistake. He was driving through Nevada on his way to a temporary work site. One of his vehicle's taillights was broken. A state trooper pulled him over for a routine traffic stop. Daniel provided a driver's license issued under a different name. The trooper ran the license through the system. The information returned incomplete. As part of standard procedure, the trooper took Daniel's fingerprints. The results triggered an alert. The fingerprints matched a man who had been legally declared deceased. Daniel Harper. At first, authorities assumed it was an error. Fingerprint mismatches are rare but not impossible. However, further verification confirmed the match. Daniel Harper was supposed to be dead. Within hours, federal authorities were notified, and a case that had been buried for 7 years was reopened. The event that finally shattered the carefully constructed life of Emily Harper did not begin with investigators or journalists. It began with a routine traffic stop in Nevada on a quiet Thursday afternoon in August 2019. Daniel Harper, living under the assumed name Mark Reynolds, was driving a rental van from a short-term construction job back to the motel where he was staying. One of the van's brake lights was not functioning properly, and a state trooper noticed it while on routine patrol. The trooper signaled for Daniel to pull over. He did so without hesitation, unaware that this stop would change his life and the lives of many others forever. As Daniel handed over his license and registration, the officer noted that the identification was issued in another state under a name that did not match any local records. This, by itself, was not unusual. The rental company had allowed him to rent the vehicle with a temporary out-of-state license. The trooper followed standard procedure and began a routine check. It was when fingerprints were taken that the situation escalated. The system flagged a match: Daniel Harper, deceased. At first, the officer thought there must have been a mistake. Records sometimes contain errors. People are misidentified. Clerical mistakes happen every day. But when the trooper cross-referenced with the FBI's fingerprint database, the result was unmistakable. Daniel Harper had been declared dead for 7 years. Within hours, federal authorities were notified, and Daniel was taken in for questioning by agents from the FBI and state investigators. Daniel initially refused to answer questions. He presented his assumed identity, claiming that the fingerprints must have been confused with someone else. However, investigators already had access to multiple forms of official identification, bank records, and the history of the life insurance claim. When confronted with the details, his story began to unravel. The investigators were methodical. They documented his movements over the past 7 years. They reviewed financial transactions, rental agreements, and temporary employment records. They confirmed that he had been living under assumed identities to avoid detection. Under interrogation, Daniel began to reveal the story he had not shared with anyone outside Emily Harper. He admitted that he had left Ohio on the night of the fire. He described how Emily had suggested the plan months in advance, framing it as a theoretical scenario, not a real scheme. He alleged he reluctantly agreed to disappear after the fire. He believed he would receive some financial support from Emily during his time in hiding, enough to start a new life elsewhere. Instead, Emily cut off all communication. She received the insurance payout and relocated to Arizona without contacting him again. Daniel explained that he had spent the next several years surviving under false identities. He worked jobs that do not require official documentation, lived in motels or temporary rentals, and avoided hospitals and government offices. He could not establish credit, open a bank account, or engage in any legal employment without risking exposure. From the investigator's perspective, Daniel's story provided context, but it was Emily Harper's actions that became the central focus of the investigation. Emily had not simply acted to escape grief. According to investigators, she had orchestrated a plan to stage Daniel's death, receive nearly $2 million in insurance money, and start over with her life. Evidence collected included bank transfers, property sales, and communication logs that supported the narrative. Emily was arrested in her home in Arizona a few days later. The arrest was executed quietly but efficiently. She did not resist. Authorities later stated that she appeared composed, almost indifferent during her arrest. Federal investigators and insurance fraud specialists began piecing together the full scope of the scheme. They identified the sequence of events leading to Daniel's death declaration, including the fire, the lack of a body, the life insurance application, and the payout. Each step had been carefully documented, but investigators noted how the absence of a physical body had initially made verification difficult. Emily's new life had appeared unremarkable from the outside. She had bought property with cash, operated a small business, and built a social network in her new community. But investigators discovered a network of contacts and temporary addresses that allowed her to remain under the radar for years. The most compelling evidence came from Daniel himself. His testimony described the planning, the execution, and the aftermath. He explained how Emily had insisted on precise steps to ensure the fire appeared accidental. He described the financial plan she presented and the way she cut off all contact once the insurance money had been transferred. Investigators were particularly interested in the logistics of the fire itself. Fire marshals re-examined the old records and photographs. While no accelerants had been officially found, the pattern of the blaze suggested a carefully staged fire. Investigators concluded that, while difficult to prove in 2012, Emily had manipulated circumstances to maximize damage while minimizing the likelihood of discovery. The insurance company, upon learning the truth, cooperated fully with the federal investigation. They reviewed all communications and payment approvals. Documents revealed that Emily had met every requirement, making her claim technically valid, even though the circumstances were highly suspicious. By the end of the initial investigation, federal authorities had established a clear chain of events. Emily Harper suggested staging Daniel's death. Daniel agreed but was left out of the financial process once the insurance payout was approved. The Cedar Ridge Drive fire was carefully orchestrated to destroy the house and create plausible deniability. Emily collected the insurance money and relocated. Daniel lived under an assumed identity for 7 years until a traffic stop exposed the truth. The investigators now had the pieces they needed to proceed with formal charges. Emily Harper was charged with multiple counts, including insurance fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. The federal case highlighted the complexity of identity fraud, staged deaths, and financial crimes. Meanwhile, Daniel Harper began the process of reclaiming his legal identity. He worked with attorneys to restore his records, update identification, and provide a full account to law enforcement. This process took months, but it established him as a credible witness for the prosecution of Emily Harper. From the outside, the public followed the story with a mixture of fascination and disbelief. News outlets described the case as rare, shocking, and bizarre, noting that staged deaths are uncommon and that surviving without a legal identity for 7 years is nearly impossible. The traffic stop in Nevada was unremarkable at first glance, but it became the event that exposed a carefully maintained deception. It demonstrated how a single, routine event can unravel years of planning, and how minor mistakes can have major consequences in cases of fraud and criminal conspiracy. For investigators, the case was a textbook example of how patience, persistence, and thorough verification can uncover crimes that initially appear to have no resolution. For Daniel Harper, it was a moment of vindication after years of living in uncertainty. By the end of this chapter of the investigation, Emily Harper's carefully constructed life had collapsed. She faced the reality of federal charges, a courtroom trial, and the certainty that her actions would have legal consequences. The events of that traffic stop set the stage for a trial that would captivate the nation and reveal the full extent of her plan. After federal investigators gathered sufficient evidence against Emily Harper, the case moved to the courtroom. The charges included insurance fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. The case quickly attracted media attention as stories of the widow who collected millions from a dead husband who was actually alive captured public curiosity. Emily Harper's trial began in early 2020, nearly 8 years after the fire that had ostensibly ended Daniel Harper's life. The courtroom was filled with reporters, family members, legal teams, and interested members of the public. The prosecution, led by a federal attorney specializing in white-collar crime, laid out the case in a methodical and detailed manner. They began by presenting the history of the Harper household prior to the fire. Testimonies from neighbors described a couple who appeared typical on the surface, but noted tensions in the marriage. Financial records were introduced, showing Daniel's increase in life insurance coverage less than a year before the fire. The prosecution emphasized that Emily was the sole beneficiary and had full control of the claim after Daniel was presumed dead. Next, investigators recounted the events of the night of the fire. Fire marshals testified about the intensity of the blaze, the unusual burn patterns, and the impossibility of recovering a body intact. While they could not definitively prove arson, they noted that the circumstances were highly convenient to someone who sought to conceal a disappearance. Emily's movements after the fire became a central point in the trial. Bank transfers showed large deposits from the insurance payout, property sales, and cash withdrawals consistent with relocation and establishing a new life. Federal investigators highlighted how Emily had moved to Arizona, purchased property outright, and established a small business, all without drawing attention from authorities. The pivotal testimony came from Daniel Harper himself. Sitting on the witness stand, he described, in chronological order, the planning of the staged fire, his escape, and the years he spent living under an assumed identity. His testimony included details that only the participants in the scheme could have known: the timing of the fire, the instructions Emily gave, and the financial plan she had outlined. Daniel was careful to avoid dramatization. He recounted facts and answered questions directly, allowing the jury to understand the sequence of events. He explained the fear and uncertainty he experienced while living without legal identity, the constant need to avoid official records, and the challenges of surviving under an assumed name. This testimony gave the jury a clear understanding of both the human and criminal dimensions of the case. Emily's defense focused on minimizing her culpability. Her attorneys argued that Daniel had been a willing participant, that the plan had been mutually agreed upon, and that she had not acted with intent to commit fraud. They portrayed her as a woman who had been trying to maintain her safety and financial security in difficult circumstances. However, the prosecution countered with the simple, undeniable fact: Daniel Harper had been legally declared dead, and Emily Harper had collected nearly $2 million in insurance without ever alerting authorities to his continued existence. The evidence demonstrated planning, deliberate action, and concealment, hallmarks of fraud. Throughout the trial, the jury was presented with a timeline: the life insurance policy increase, the fire, the sale of the house, the payout, Emily's relocation, and the traffic stop that revealed Daniel was alive. Each piece of evidence built a clear narrative. Emily had intentionally staged her husband's death to collect money while avoiding detection for years. After 3 weeks of testimony, the case moved to closing arguments. The prosecution emphasized that the crime was not impulsive or emotional, it was calculated. They underscored the moral implications, noting how Emily had manipulated both the legal system and public perception. The defense argued that while the outcome was regrettable, the circumstances were complex, and the events had been influenced by Daniel's cooperation. The jury deliberated for 3 days. On the third day, they returned a unanimous verdict: guilty on all counts. Sentencing followed in late 2020. Emily Harper received a federal prison sentence of 12 years, along with a restitution order requiring her to repay the insurance company the full payout amount. Her prison sentence reflected both the financial scale of the crime and the intentionality of the fraud. Daniel Harper, while initially facing minor charges related to his assumed identity, received a reduced sentence due to his cooperation with the investigation and the fact that he had not acted to personally profit from the scheme. He was formally reinstated as a legal citizen, able to reclaim identification, bank accounts, and access to public services. The case became a topic of discussion across the country. News outlets, podcasts, and true crime forums dissected the events, often highlighting the rarity of a dead spouse reappearing alive years after a staged death. Legal analysts examined how Emily's careful planning initially allowed her to avoid detection and how a single, routine traffic stop ultimately exposed the entire scheme. The community where the fire had occurred reacted with shock and disbelief. Neighbors who had attended Daniel Harper's memorial were stunned to learn that he had been alive all along. Emily Harper's friends and colleagues in Arizona expressed a mixture of astonishment and betrayal. Psychologists analyzing the case noted several points of human behavior. They emphasized the willingness of some individuals to manipulate circumstances to achieve financial gain, the long-term effects of maintaining deception, and the psychological toll on those involved, including Daniel Harper, who had spent 7 years living in isolation and under constant threat of discovery. The aftermath of the case also had legal implications. Insurance companies reevaluated their policies regarding claims where no body is recovered. Law enforcement agencies updated protocols for verifying deaths in fire incidents, particularly when significant financial payouts are involved. The case became a reference point in discussions of fraud prevention and identity verification. For Daniel Harper, the resolution of the trial marked a moment of closure, though not complete relief. He had survived years of living without recognition, constant stress, and uncertainty. While he was officially alive, the social, emotional, and financial consequences of the scheme could not be erased. Emily Harper's conviction served as a clear example of accountability. Her actions, meticulously planned over several years, had consequences that could not be avoided. While she had temporarily benefited from deception, justice had ultimately prevailed.